Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Greer. I'm CEO of Secure Content Technologies, and I am really happy to be here today with Jonathan Davis of Silverfort. He is the Director of Field and Product Strategy, and I have had the real pleasure of working with Jonathan and Silverfort for well over a year now. We thought we'd come to you today and kind of bring out some of the reasons why Silverfort is really being successful in the security market. So Jonathan, one of the things that some of my clients were coming to me with was they felt like they had blind spots in their security that they either weren't able to see or weren't able to address. So how does Silverfort help customers kind of flesh this out and dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say we kind of probably look at it in kind of four different ways about some of the things that we're solving for customers. I would say a lot of customers struggle with just the visibility part of identity and authentication. And I think a lot of organizations, right, just struggle to understand, what is happening from an identity authentication, right? Visibility, misconfigurations, hygiene type of things, different threats that might be happening across their on-prem and cloud environments. So the first piece we always talk to customers about is, hey, just that visibility is key because you have to know what is happening first. And then once you know that, then you can start looking at how to better protect or reduce that attack surface. And then I would say like the next thing we see a lot of is just these systems and like just these protocols. So things like command line interfaces like a PowerShell or maybe something authenticating with NTLM are very difficult for customers to put controls like MFA on. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're seeing a lot of times being exploited is just these older interfaces, these older protocols that customers still use, right? But they don't have visibility into it. But a lot of these things were never designed with security in mind, like the controls like MFA aren't really feasible for a lot of things authenticating to Active Directory. So that's another thing we see. And then the whole thing we're talking about user accounts just there is all these non-human identities, I think, are becoming very problematic for people. So when I'm talking about non-human identities, I'm talking about, right, it could be an on-prem service account to all these different non-human identities that exist in the cloud now, right? APIs, tokens, service principals. And a lot of organizations really struggle to, one, have that visibility, but be able to wrap different levels of controls around these things. And then the last piece I'm seeing around, identity and how people are trying to solve it is just, gaps around how they've deployed their privileged access management system. Because of just the nature of how AD was designed and how we've rolled out these privileged access management tools, we're still leaving gaps in areas that can be exploited. And those are probably the four big things I'm seeing from customers today and kind of why they're talking to us.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing and what I've heard from customers as well is they might have traditional MFA and for a long time think, oh well, we're good, we're good here. But now they need to really enhance their security for systems that don't support traditional MFA, and Silverfort meets that objective. Can you maybe tell our audience a little bit about how you do that and why it's really effective?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, MFA is not a new concept out there. It's been out there for years and years. And what organizations have done is, like, I've done MFA on the things that are easy. So people will do it on MFA on, RDP access, or I've got MFA on the VPN. All of these cloud applications is very easy to add MFA on. But the problem is, right, the really troublesome stuff is these authentications going to Active Directory that are being exploited. So we're talking about, these command line interfaces or things like vCenter console access, or maybe a network share or database. These are the things that you just really can't integrate MFA into it, or it's very complex. And these are the things that are being exploited. And how we're addressing that is like through our architecture, and because we're sitting behind basically Active Directory and these other directories, now we can actually see the authentication in real time, and we can actually add a control like MFA on these previously unsupportable type of things by just sitting behind the directory and looking at it from an authentications perspective instead of trying to do these complex integrations with every resource and service that we want to protect.
Okay, interesting. One of the things that was eye-opening for me as I started to work with some of my customers in Silverfort was service accounts. They're often overlooked, and Silverfort has a very unique way of protecting those service accounts that has given, I know, a number of my customers some peace of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we look at a service account, right, I can't add MFA to a service account because there's nobody to interact with it. And what we find is a lot of customers, really struggle around service accounts. I often joke that, some organizations have service accounts in their environment that are older than any employee within the organization. And that's the big problem because a lot of organizations just struggle with the visibility perspective of service accounts. So they just don't know even where they're being used. If they're being used by multiple applications, maybe if an admin used their credentials as a service account, now I've got an account being used by a user as well as a service account. So there's all these issues, right, with service accounts, and that's the problem where people are afraid to touch these things because they're afraid to break something and cause some sort of outage. And these other solutions that we've tried to do with trying to rotate a password becomes very difficult because if I don't know where this is being used, or if I've hard coded the password, or if it's a very manual process, it makes it very problematic. And how we're solving it for our customers is, again, going back to what I had mentioned to your previous question, because we're sitting behind the directory, I'm seeing that authentication in real time. And based off like a naming convention, an OU, or just based off the behavior of how the service account's being used, I'll tell you exactly where it's being used, what sources, what destinations use it, other insights into it. But then I can wrap basically a fence around the service account so it can only be used for its intended purpose. And if it tries to do anything else outside of that, I can just block it. And that's, I think, probably what you were saying with customers really find it beneficial because it's just a simple approach to really reducing the attack surface and preventing this service account from being used maliciously.
Yeah, I've seen it give a number of the customers a lot more peace of mind to something that they initially weren't even aware was an issue. But once they started seeing the issues, it fleshed itself out. A newer
and just to add to that, now you're seeing, right, all these non-human identities in the cloud. It's even exploding and becoming more of a mess just because the interconnected nature of it. And we've got a great way to discover, find these non-human identities and wrap different levels of control or remediation efforts around it as well.
That's fantastic. Something that's kind of a little new to me is the circumvention of privileged access management or PAM solutions. Sorry, that was tough coming out. But and that's become an area that you all are really forging ahead in. And so I think maybe if you could educate us a little bit more on that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, and it all comes back to, I think, our architecture. So when I look at, a lot of privileged access management solutions, what we're finding with our customers is because of the complexity, right? And because it's changing how people access systems or a different process, it's very difficult to implement fully. And that just leaves, right, accounts that you haven't even put into your vault that still have privileges that, how are you securing those? And a lot of times what organizations do is they invest in these PAM solutions. They implement this vault to store passwords and rotate passwords. But then they still allow their users to check out the password and then just connect directly to whatever server or resource they need to. And that's kind of defeating the whole purpose because the challenge is it's complex because they have to do some network segmentation. They have to restrict where these users connect from. And what Silverfort's solving is really, I would say, addressing the privileged access security piece that I think often goes overlooked by enforcing controls because we're sitting behind the directory and I'm seeing these authentications in real time. Now I can say, okay, Karen, she always has to connect through my privileged access management system. Or for a lot of these organizations, right, they're just looking at ways to really just put security on top of these privileged authentications. So maybe controls like MFA are great, how we lock down service accounts, or how we just restrict where a privileged user can connect from, and basically wrap a fence around only allowing them to use this privileged account in the intended relationship. Really, we're finding addresses a lot of the privileged access security that customers have struggled with.
Oh, that's fantastic. So if a customer has an existing identity infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
how does Silverfort integrate with that and provide like a seamless security without disrupting their workflow? If I'm wording that correctly, like a number of customers say, well, how do I do all this without interrupting the workflow we've already got in place? Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've taken a kind of a unique approach to it because, as I mentioned, instead of worrying about every service and resource that you want to protect and trying to do some sort of complex integration and roll out all these different controls, that's made the problem worse. What we did was, well, let's just look at where these systems are authenticating to. And now what we do is just think of Silverfort as a layer behind your identity provider. So you've got, Active Directory is the primary, directory for on-prem. We're just have this integration with Active Directory that we developed that allows us to sit behind the directory. And because we can do that, now we can enforce these real-time controls very simply and without all the complexity and and change in user process or changing how application works. We just sit behind that directory. And that's the same approach we're taking into these clouds. So whether your customers are using Okta or Entra ID or OneLogin and Ping in combination with Active Directory, again, we're just behind these directories, seeing the authentications both for your on-prem as well as all these identities and what's happening in the cloud, and giving you various levels of control to be able to protect these things and protect your identity.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. This was so enlightening for me, and I've been working with you guys for some time now. So I'm sure that our listeners are really excited about the messaging. Thank you so much. And everyone, stay tuned. We will be doing more of these in 2025. And if you have any questions, please reach out. We'd love to talk to you more about Silverfort.
Take care.
Thank you.